Hello everyone and welcome to part 3 of What If Deku Had All for One. Let's jump straight into the video. So this is what it means to be a hero these days. She flinched just as much as the pro-hero standing in front of her. Neither of them had heard the new arrival who now blocked the exit. Help me dash, Slugger turned, in a combat stance. Can't you see I'm a little, Jesus, what the fuck are you? The newcomer had been deadly silent on arrival, a red scarf around his neck and a tattered white mask fluttering gently with a cool breeze that seemed to stir in the alleyway. How he had arrived in absolute silence was beyond Himiko. He was wearing heavy-duty metal boots and plates of armor on top of a black combat suit, which should have been loud as anything. Between the hunched back, spiked black hair, bandages across his arms and the fact that the guy had no freaking nose whatsoever, he looked fierce. Badass, even. He focused his red eyes on Slugger, still clutching the bat. You're the pro-hero Slugger, aren't you? The hero's grip tightened slightly. That's me, pal. Who the hell are you? His question was ignored. What are you doing to her? This little freak tried attacking me dash, the red eyes narrowed. Himiko realized he was holding a knife now. I saw that she didn't. Don't try that lie with me, hero. Slugger grimaced at him, as if something had dawned on him. Hey, I know you. We were looking for you in Tokyo, back along. You're that vigilante who dropped off the grid all that time ago, right? What was your name? Stetson. Stalwart. Stendhal. The raggedy man straightened up just for a second. The idea of Stendhal died a long time ago. You can call me Stain. Heh, whatever man. Slugger gestured with his bat, and nearly hit her in the face again. You don't know a damn thing about this girl, so back outta here and let a pro handle this. The newcomer, Stain, didn't move a muscle. I know what I saw, and what I heard from you. I'm going nowhere. He turned to look at Himiko, sharp red eyes meeting her bright yellow in a gaze which somehow didn't send a shiver up her spine. Despite his appearance, and the intense glare, she didn't feel threatened. What's your name, kid? She gulped. Himiko Toga, Sir Dash, and what is your quirk? The one he despises so much. She hesitated as the bat wavered in front of her face, but when it didn't move she swallowed and carried on meekly. I can transform into other people. I need there be blood to do so, and depending how much I drink, I can stay transformed for longer. She had braced for the inevitable, the disgust, the horror that was usually directed her way. Instead, the skeletal face of Stain softened before her very eyes for a second, to her complete shock. For the first time in her life, a stranger didn't see her quirk as something to be feared, and there was no hint of pity in his gaze like there had been from the people who had tried to change her. He couldn't be impressed. What a gift. Her eyes widened at that statement. Yeah. A small price to pay from those closest to you, and you could become them. Stain looked down at the knife in his hand, and ran a finger over it delicately. You could be a great hero with the ability to disguise like that. You could be an actress, or a spy, or even an undercover cop. Your potential is frightening, Himiko. The fuck is wrong with you? The pro-hero in the alleyway clearly didn't agree with his analysis. Maybe freaks attract freaks, because how the shit are you telling me she could be something great? She hurts people with her quirk. The sooner she's put down, the better for society. She watched with wide eyes as Stain turned to face Slugger, and she herself gasped at the fury that had suddenly appeared in the eyes of the former vigilante. No, it wasn't just in the eyes, that wouldn't do what was in front of her justice to describe it like that. The man's whole aura had turned violent and apoplectic with sheer, unbridled rage. How dare you? Slugger took a step back, holding his bat in front of him as if to ward off the Raggedy Man. "Hey man, back down now, I'm warning you dash, I heard everything you said to her. I saw what you did." Stain took another step forward, lurching, and Himiko saw for the first time that the man had a katana on his back. "You call yourself a hero? No, I won't let you hurt her like that and get away with it." Slugger gulped, seeming to regain some fighting spirit from somewhere despite the malevolent aura coming off of the man in front of him. "Tough talk asshole, but you really think you can take a pro on your own? I'll take you in and give both of you freaks to the police." Himiko was surprised to see Stain smirk, and a long tongue come out of his mouth to lick his lips as if delighted. "Oh really? Who said I was alone? Wadash, Spinner." As the man roared there was a blur of motion from the wall to the left of the pro-hero, and Himiko realized that another person clad in a blue hoodie had somehow been clinging to the wall vertically, hanging off of it and defying gravity. In a blur of green, this latest new arrival dropped onto Slugger and swiped down with a clawed hand, grabbing the bat and throwing it away to the other end of the alleyway. Slugger screamed as something punched into his right shoulder for a moment, before smacking the newcomer away with a palm strike into the trash bags in the alleyway. When the now-named Spinner straightened up and dusted himself off, Himiko was struck by one detail about her second hero. Not that he looked reptilian, although the green scales and clawed hands were something she had never seen before. Nor was she shocked by his purple hair, which stood upright about his head like he had suffered an electric shock, or the massive sword which he was carrying on his back just like Stain. The thing that actually struck Himiko, more than anything, was that he didn't look that much older than her. He was still a teenager, and yet he'd attacked a pro-hero for going after her. Spinner nodded to Stain reverently as he walked to stand beside the older man. "People like this guy don't deserve to be heroes." Stain nodded. "I agree. Did you get it?" The older kid opened up his scaly right palm, and revealed what he had punched into Slugger, a short knife with a serrated blade. "He has this coming." Slugger reached up to his bleeding shoulder with a snarl, and Himiko was glad she couldn't see his face under his white mask. "What did you do, you damn dash?" In an instant, Himiko was shocked to see an abnormally long tongue lap against the blade of the knife, as Stain tasted the blood on the knife. Almost immediately, Slugger's limbs wobbled like jelly and his legs completely collapsed underneath him, all of the strength gone from his body. Gah! So many emotions went through her head as she watched the hero fall unceremoniously into the trash. Horror that the situation had escalated like this, gratitude that these two had come to help her, hope that this may mean she didn't need to go back, but most of all wonder at Stain's power. He had used blood as part of his quirk to help her. He was like her. He would understand. "You bastard!" Slugger screamed from on the floor like a wounded animal. "Is this your quirk? The hell did you do to me?" "Only what you deserve," Stain said, tossing the knife back to Spinner, who wiped it on a rag and secreted it back into his hoodie's pocket. "Total paralysis. You won't be hurting her anymore. How dare you?" Slugger's anger appeared to be mounting. "You dare attack a hero on duty, you pair of villains." "Villains? Us?" Stain turned to the stricken pro with a snarl. "The only villain I see is the one who beat a defenseless child up in an alleyway and threatened to torture her quirk out of her. And you think we're the bad guys? You're supposed to be a vigilante," Slugger sneered. "You're supposed to help people, not attack pro-heroes dash. I don't see a pro-hero in front of me. I see a fake who bullies those weaker, someone unworthy of the title." "Are you dash?" Stain suddenly drew his katana from his back, and leveled it at Slugger in much the same way as Slugger had pointed his bat at Himiko. She saw how effective it was at silencing the hero. "I tried to become a hero once. I saw how many did it for the wrong reasons, and it disgusted me. All those people in it for money or fame, who would never sacrifice anything of theirs no matter the cost, who would never do what needed to be done. I tried to tell the world what needed to be done. I became a vigilante and did whatever I could to hunt down and stop the worst of the worst. The heroes saw a vigilante and cried foul because I was doing what they should have done, because I wasn't seeking reward or glory. Because of the monsters we let become heroes. He stroked Slugger's cheek with the worn blade, gently. All Might was worthy. He was noble and pure and self-sacrificing, and we should have built a world around ideals like his. But you all failed him. When he needed your help most, you were nowhere to be found, and he gave his life to save us all from evil incarnate. A shadow fell across his face. You're not worthy of following him. Your prejudices make you weak and you defile the idea of heroics. You embody that flawed system we cannot escape from, where anything is excusable and where it's perfectly acceptable to trample on those less fortunate. Look at the ruin of our sham-filled society after All Might died, and tell me you have brought on a better world. You have failed us all, and you will pay the price. Hey now. Slugger's voice wasn't the vicious taunt of a predator like it had been with Himiko earlier. This was the wobbling tone of a scared little man, paralyzed and unable to act, robbed of power. We can talk about this tch. And now you seek to save your own skin, rather than apologies. Stain lowered the katana to touch the tip over Slugger's heart, as Spinner shook his head in pity. No, that was disgust Himiko could see. Society needs to be corrected, so that people can live in peace and happiness free of hatred and abuse. If nobody will stand against the fake heroes, then I will purge them one by one, until they all are gone with the villains too. You monologue like a villain man villain. Vigilante. Does the title matter in a world like this anymore? Stain shook his head at the fallen pro. All I know is that this is our mission. If you are a hero, then I am a hero killer. As Slugger's eyes widened, Himiko realized what was coming and didn't look away. She didn't want to. As Stain pushed the katana forward through the hero's heart, Slugger crumpled, the light fading from his eyes as his head slumped forward. It was the first time Himiko had seen anyone die in the flesh, and the part of her which wasn't screaming about how much trouble they would be in if someone found them was drowned out by the part that felt relieved. She wasn't bitterly gloating at the death of her assailant, but it felt just. It felt right. Stain left his katana buried to the hilt for a good 20 seconds, staring at the mask of the hero as if searching for an answer, before withdrawing it and wiping it on a rag offered to him by Spinner. One step closer. Himiko propped herself up against the side of the dumpster, her back aching, and despite everything flashed a toothy smile to both Stain and his young follower. I owe you both. The younger one, Spinner, acknowledged her with his own smile. Least we could do. We've been watching him for a while, but the way he treated you. We couldn't stand by and watch. Stain now turned to her, and crouched down to her level, keeping his back to the corpse he had just created. For a moment, Himiko couldn't read his gaze, and tried not to lose herself staring into those deep red eyes, or to unnerve her savior by focusing too much on his complete lack of a nose. Then, after what seemed like an age, the fire in those eyes softened. He was concerned. I'm sorry. What for? We didn't step in immediately because we didn't know what your situation was. I listened for too long because he accused you of being a villain, and you got hurt. He rubbed a calloused hand over her bruised shoulder. I apologize. She winced. It's okay, mister. Did. She paused. Did you mean what you said before you killed him? About fixing society. About standing against abuse. Cleaning out the bad guys. His gaze became hardened, resolute. Without question. Can I get in on that? Spinner seemed to jump in shock at that. You're serious? She nodded, and with everything she had she knew that she wanted it. She had nothing to go back to and nobody looking out for her, but his words had struck a chord in her like nothing ever had before. I've seen the worst in people for too long, and I don't like it. I don't like not being able to live like me, I don't like that people write me off or want to fix me, that all my quirk does is disgust them. She took a deep breath and looked down at her feet. Please, Mr. Staney, Mr. Spinner. Shuichi. She turned to look at the lizard man. Huh? He nodded, clenching a clawed fist. Shuichi Iguchi. That's my name. Mr. Spinner just makes me sound old. She giggled, briefly cursing in her head how it hurt her rib cage. You're older than me, mister. Yeah, but I'm still young too. I'm the big brother type, not your dad. He jerked a thumb at Stain with a smirk. That's his job. You are not calling me father. Stain shook his head, turning away, but the corner of his mouth twitched ever so slightly. Just because I took you in and trained you. He took you in. Himiko gasped in realization. You're a runaway too. Heh, yeah. Shuichi ran a hand through his hair. The world wasn't kind to mutant types even before Incident Zero. All Might dies, and society treats us like monsters even more. That's awful. Yeah. He pointed to Stain. This guy found me at my lowest and gave me something to believe in, and a roof to call my home. Never looked back since. Then you have to take me in too. She reached out and tugged on that long red scarf, pleading, making her yellow eyes as wide as possible. Please, Mr. Staney. For a moment the hunched man didn't look at her, before he sighed and turned to her. If you come with us, this will be common. We do things which are awful because they have to be done, for a better society. If that's what it takes then I'm in, she shouted, jumping to her feet with a fist bump before realizing with the beating she'd taken just how bad an idea that was. Ow. Stain rolled his eyes good-naturedly, before stashing his knife away and picking her up in his arms like she weighed nothing. Himiko was surprised how gentle he was being. I admire your enthusiasm, but save your strength. We'll heal you up first before we start your training. Something burst in her heart, and she felt tears coming to her eyes for the first time in a long time, tears of happiness. You're taking me? The ragged man nodded, the corners of his mouth turning up ever so slightly. You can come with us. We wouldn't leave you out without a home anyway, but I like your spirit, young Himiko. And I meant what I said about your quirk, by the way. Stain shifted his arm slightly to move his arm further away from her ribs. I'll tell you more about mine, when you're rested. You'll find we're quite similar, after all. She tried and failed miserably to wipe her tears while being carried. Thank you so much. It's the right thing to do. Stain nodded at her, before turning to Spinner. We might want to get the car here, rather than walk her down the street. Less attention and less pain. Yes sir. Spinner saluted, before digging a set of car keys out of a hoodie pocket and running off to the road at the end of the alleyway. We'll get you rested up in no time. He looked back down at her in his arms, and Himiko felt safe for the first time in a long time. Even as the world threw its worst at you, you seized a chance to try to change it for the better with both hands. Hell yeah. Someone's got to try, right? I agree. His gaze softened. I'll feed you, give you somewhere to stay, and keep you safe. I'll train you, help you make the most of your quirk, teach you how to look after yourself. With just the one rule. My name is Kaizo Makaguro. Kaizome, Stain, or Sir are acceptable going forward. He smirked at her, suddenly, and caught her off guard. Mr. Staney gets you double training. Dad gets you triple. She chuckled, as Spinner rolled up at the end of the alleyway in a beaten-up old family saloon that looked like it was about to fall off its axles at any given moment. I might end up on double training a lot then, sir. His grin widened, and it would have looked sinister in any other context. Heh. We'll see about that. As Spinner came around to the side of the car and opened the door for her and Stain, Himiko watched with wonder as Stain lowered her gently into the back seat of the car, taking care to run the seatbelt over her gently and not press down on the shoulder Slugger had hit earlier. Entirely by accident, it seemed she had found someone who would accept her for what she was, someone who would help her grow in the face of that, who would support her and look after her because they genuinely wanted to, not because they had been told they had to. The world had suddenly, in the space of 5 minutes, gotten a lot less frightening and a lot safer for Himiko Toga, and whatever happened going forward in the crazy, chaotic world. She didn't have to run anymore. Himiko Toga. Aged 12. Morning, folks, Makoto Kobayashi here with your morning news. At a ceremony marking a year since the death of the pro-hero Slugger in Muzutafu, at the hands of the dangerous villain and hero killer Stain, the #1 hero Endeavor surprised us all with a speech in which he promised a radical shake-up to the hero community of Japan. Stain's identity remains unknown to date, and the dangerous criminal has since claimed the lives of 4 other pro-heroes. Unverified reports also link him to a mysterious fire which burned down a Muzutafu orphanage and killed a number of staff members on the very same day as Slugger's murder. Tch, that's not his style. Izuku looked up from the drawing he was scribbling in his notebook at Tenko, who appeared to be irritated at the radio news. Huh? What do you mean? Tenko kicked a foot as if irritated, and it reminded Izuku of the Mirko press conferences he had seen, where the rabbit hero tapped her foot whenever she got fired up about a question. He's a hero killer, isn't he? Going after a bunch of orphans isn't something he'd do. Izuku shushed him. I'm trying to hear the rest of this. Tenko kept quiet as the rest of the news carried on. He'd seen what Izuku could get like about heroes, after all. Since the first appearance of Stain, a number of prominent vigilantes and copycat villains have risen up within our society, and heroes are dealing with increased pressure and an almost daily uptake in civil unrest and villain attacks. Questions have come over the fitness of Japan's pro-heroes to cope with this societal disturbance, and how prepared they are for the next supervillains to emerge. Endeavor had this to say. The world has changed since All Might died, but that doesn't give people a right to take the law into their own hands. Nor does it mean that villains should be empowered to act as they please without recourse. It is clear that our system is running to catch up, and the time to act is now. I will soon be bringing news to you all on how the pro-heroes of this country will be better funded to take back control of society from those who revel in chaos. To the vigilantes, I say your day will come, and you would do well to quit before we really come for you. And to the villains. Just watch me. There you have it, folks. Endeavor with a fierce warning, and I can't help but fear for what comes next. For heroes, and for our society. Here's Toji with the weather. Izuku turned off the radio as the ever-so-chipper weatherman began to chatter away about a depressingly rainy day, and closed the notebook. The news was never good these days, and it was why he threw himself into his training so wholeheartedly. You're getting rather good too. Ever since he and Tenko had discovered his new quirk, Tenko had insisted that he found a way to train. Izuku didn't want to cause any trouble, and he knew full well that quirk usage in public was illegal, and he felt really unsure that sneaking into an abandoned warehouse was wrong. Tenko, however, had warmed his heart the moment that he revealed he had read all of Izuku's hero analysis notebooks cover to cover, and with a few comments about Izuku badly lacking in XP and needing to upgrade your skill tree branches, within a few months Tenko had made a plan. It turns out that Tenko's plan had been everything he'd ever wanted and more. Let's face it, Tenko had said, as he dragged Izuku along by the hood of his All Might hoodie, all these kids who think they're so special have years more training on you. They may have given you crap, but you can show them how quick you can level up, how OP you can be, how unbreakable your combos are. You can be a hero, just like in your books, Izuku. His reasoning struck a chord with the mild-mannered boy, and for the first time in his life he had found someone who believed in his dream fully. He had thrown himself into training his quirk the moment after he stopped crying, and after an embarrassed Tenko pried Izuku's arms off of him from the longest thank you hug ever. The quirk testing in the back garden had been one thing, but Tenko had outdone himself with their new secret base. The abandoned warehouse in Mizurufu was slightly off the beaten path, about halfway between the school and Izuku's home. Once it had been a store for hero merchandise, and indeed hero figurines and body pillows and old toys could still be found in boxes. Izuku had screamed when he found a limited edition edge-shot figure buried in a corner. Now, it was the idea playground for two teenage boys who had all kinds of ideas and a whole lot of catching up to do training-wise. There were high roofs, piles of rubble, wide open spaces and all kinds of shop dummies to make into villains. Their imaginations were the limit, and they ran wild. Izuku had slowly grown more used to channeling the air blasts he could produce from his fledgling quirk over time, after nearly a year and a half visiting the warehouse. Tenko had helped him improvise beyond the immediate blasts he could summon, and Izuku found that he could channel the air in different ways, a concentrated beam here, a wide rippling arc in an area of effect attack there, a delayed reaction blast over there. In turn, Izuku noticed that Tenko was starting to come out of his shell with his own quirk, using it more around Izuku and practicing destroying rubble, taking on larger pieces of concrete, cutting off his quirk to eat only the glass out of a window and leave the frame intact. They grew with each other. The only arguments the two boys had were about names. Izuku had insisted on calling his quirk Air Force, as an All Might tribute, much to Tenko's chagrin when he proudly tried to call it Air Cannon, and Tenko was reluctant to budge from the slightly creepy name of Decay he had given his own quirk. Tenko also tried instantly naming moves which Izuku came up with, using obscure references from old shows and games and movies which Izuku had never watched. Atmospheric Rift and Liable Tempest were just two of the bizarre names which barely even fitted the moves Izuku had created, and Izuku had no clue where they'd come from. Emerald Cyclone worked, though. Fits with the hair. Inko had screamed blue hell at both of them the first time that they came back home, caked in dirt and with a scratch below Tenko's left eye from a piece of glass which had shattered under an Izuku air blast, but she had slowly learned to let things go a little bit. It helped break the ice when she got a visit from a Mizurufu police officer who kindly dropped by and told Inko she should be proud of her conscientious young man. Apparently he had marched Tenko straight to the police station when they arrived at the abandoned warehouse, and had put himself in front of two police officers politely requesting permission to use the space to train. Only Izuku would think to do that, or worry about not doing it, but as it turned out the police hadn't cared one bit what they were doing. With a flea in his ear from his mother to carry a mobile phone with him at all times, and not to stay out after dusk in a creepy old warehouse, Inko gave the two boys the space to bond and grow and train themselves. They had each other's backs, after all. They would be fine. Izuku looked up as he stashed the notebook away in his backpack, and met his friend's gaze. A chunk of plaster the size of Izuku's head turned to dust in his friend's palms. Sorry, Tenko. I just wanted to hear what they had to say about Endeavor. He is number one, after all. He's no All Might, Tenko replied, taking a deep breath and crouching to the floor as he slowly slipped on one of his fingerless gloves. He was happier to show his quirk around Izuku these days, but Izuku noticed that he never overdid it. I think my quirk is destructive, but have you seen what he does? Izuku sighed, zipping up the backpack. They had these debates all too often these days, rising in frequency since Tenko began to use his quirk more. Endeavor isn't perfect but he works hard. He's taken down nearly as many villains as All Might ever did now. All Might never burned civilians alive to do it, Tenko muttered, blue locks falling over his gaunt face and throwing a shadow over his eyes. It's not right. Hey, Tenko. Izuku paused, then reached out and put his hand on his friend's shoulder, to try to comfort him. He'd never seen him in such a mood before. You alright? It just makes me sick. Heroes are supposed to be the good guys, but Endeavor acts like a final boss the whole time he's out in public. Tenko's eyes narrowed. He's not the only one. Did you see that rookie make her debut a couple of weeks ago? The huge chick with the massive Mount Lady? Izuku said, biting back the urge to shoot a withering look in Tenko's direction at the disrespectful comments coming out of his mouth. I'm sure that building collapse wasn't her fault. You see. Tenko interrupted, gesturing with a gloved hand. Government-sponsored instruments of violence, everywhere you look, and we just excuse it like we're brainless NPCs. We let them beat the crap out of people and destroy our stuff just because they're heroes, because they're pros, because we just want them to fix our problems. Bakugo would fit right in. Izuku flinched a little at the mention of his former friend's name. Auntie Mitsuki was a time bomb at the best of times, but when his mother phoned up full of anger like she had never seen before, Katsuki had been broadsided by his mother's rage completely. The school had apologized finally when both Inko and Mitsuki demanded that something should be done, and the meeting that followed, with Izuku sat beside a seething and twitching Katsuki, was an experience he'd rather not repeat anytime soon. He had ended up in a new class, and Bakugo had counseling as well as a mark on his pristine record. Since that day, despite all the visits from Bakugo's parents to his mother, he hadn't seen Katsuki at all. Good riddance to bad rubbish. He clenched a fist. He will make it. He's strong, and determined, and he won't stop until he becomes number one. I'm sure of it. If he becomes a hero, we're all getting farmed, Tenko said ruefully, shaking his head and grabbing his new backpack with a gloved hand. Come on, enough quirk practice for one day. Your mom's getting takeout tonight and I could eat a house. Izuku chuckled at his friend, who seemed to have a little more of his snark back. Fine, fine. Let's go. As the two walked side by side, comfortable that they had their best friend beside them, Tenko clicked his teeth. You know, teacher made us watch that video in class yesterday, the one that got uploaded the other week. The Stain one. Huh? Yeah, the manifesto one. You seen it? Izuku looked shocked. The rise of Stain was something which had punctuated the changes in Japanese society after All Might's death, a nasty bloody comma in the paragraph on hero culture. Slugger was one of the first heroes to be attacked and killed, and his emergence had led to a video going viral. A bystander had captured a monologue from Stain in which he tore apart heroes who worked for profit, who held openly quirkist views, who trampled on those less fortunate to get to the top. Japanese society, in the wake of devastation, took those views and ran with them. Discontent towards heroes soared, copycat villains tried to surface, and a spike in vigilantism had already occurred. The Hero Public Safety Commission announced a bounty on Stain and tried to designate vigilantes as villains, but public opinion hadn't immediately followed. Stain's words still rang true for many. Why would they do that? He asked Tenko. They wanted us to start debating and stuff. Talking about what he says about heroes, who is good and who is bad, who gets to decide. Tenko kicked a bottle that had been dropped outside the warehouse entrance as they both walked out. I caught a lot of heat from my class. You. Why? Izuku put the dots together. You agreed with him? Tenko shrugged. A little. Don't you? Izuku froze on the spot. Me? Ha. You don't have to worry about me judging you for your answer. Tenko stuffed his hands into his hoodie pockets, and continued walking, as Izuku jumped to keep up. Best friend, remember. I'm not gonna run away if you say you agree with something he said. Izuku hung his head. I wish for a better world. Kinda the same as he does. A world like we had with All Might? Tenko asked. I think we all want that. No, not like that. Izuku looked up now as he walked, and he felt resolve in what he was saying. All Might was amazing, but he was so much on his own. We lost him and the whole world fell apart. We can't go back to that. Tenko's eyes widened a little, as the pair of them stepped around a couple arguing in the street. Heh, I never thought you'd say that, fanboy. I'm not a fa-. I've seen your room, you big nerd, don't even try and argue. Tenko scratched the back of his head, chuckling. Just surprised me you'd say it, that's all. I thought you'd miss him just as much as us. I do. Izuku blinked for a second, and in his mind's eye saw red for blood, and the fallen body of his idol on that fateful day, but he shook his head quickly. We can't rely on one person being like him though. We need a world of people like him. Stain hates villains. I can't call him a true villain because he wants to stop criminals too, but what he does to people he deems unworthy. Izuku shook his head. If the heroes we have aren't good enough, if they're greedy and selfish and prejudiced, then we need a new generation without those flaws. We can fix hero society by teaching proper heroes, but Stain doesn't achieve anything by killing people except hurting families, and dividing people more. The ends don't justify the means. Tenko's back straightened a little. I get that. I just think that society is glitched at the moment and needs more than a reboot. Some bits need deleting. You don't mean - nah, murdering pros just isn't the way. Tenko looked distant for a second, but shook his head. But if they don't change because of people like him, then I'm not so sure I'd want to become a hero. I'd rather take my chances joining the Crawler and the other vigilantes out there, and save people my way. Why you'd break the law to do that? If I can help people, no question. Tenko met Izuku with an appraising look. You couldn't. I just don't think I could. The law is the law, right? Tenko sighed, deadpanning. You're just too honest, aren't you, Izuku? I'm sorry. Izuku's eyes widened in panic as he took in their surroundings properly for the first time since leaving the warehouse. Wait, Tenko - his friend paused. Ah, crap. They were so used to the rundown world by now that walking past derelict buildings and empty shop units was their norm. Criminals and villains were becoming much more common now, people who just took what they wanted, and neighborhoods suffered as the police struggled. What had once been proud and clean and idyllic was sliding relentlessly toward squalor with every passing day. Normally he and Tenko would keep to the main road which would walk straight on home. Clearly when the two of them had stepped around the arguing couple into a neck of an alleyway, they had walked down the alley and carried on that way, straying far from the safe beaten track that they'd promised Inko they would keep to. Now they'd ended up in the wrong part of town, and yep, sure as anything, here came the vultures sensing the mistake. The parasites who had crawled out from under rocks into the world after Incident Zero, and were starting to get more and more eager to do as they pleased. The Yakuza. Foul creatures. Should have died off a long time ago. Izuku had no clue how they had survived the quirk proliferation, or how they had operated through history despite being relegated to cannon fodder by the emergence of powerful supervillain groups. Now though, local groups were cropping up everywhere, and a few bigger names were rising to prominence, the Ishikawa-kai, the Shai Hasaikai, groups who relished Incident Zero for removing the threat of All Might from their world. It wasn't uncommon in poorer neighborhoods or rougher cities, streets where the police were reluctant to go, to find Yakuza going door to door to collect their rent, protection money from those most afraid of them. Extortion, by any other name, would be just as sweet. And Izuku and Tenko had just the luck to come across a couple of them following their wrong turn. A hulk of a man with the head of a great white shark and wearing what looked like a Kevlar vest smiled down at him with row after row of jagged fangs. "Hey there, little kids. You lost?" Tensing up, eyeing the surrounding area, Izuku did his best to keep his expression neutral. No. His face was stoic, but his voice could have been better. Why was he so damn squeaky? Behind him, a tall and muscly woman with black spiky hair shaved at the side slid off of the dumpster on which she was sad, picking at her fingernails. No. But you're walking right through our turf. That just can't be right, because you haven't paid the toll for using our alley. Her arms flexed, and the blue tattoos on her biceps flashed iridescent for a second. Not paying the fees when they're due. A lanky blonde man emerged from behind Shark Head, and in Izuku's head he knew the guy was the ringleader of the little posse from the way he was holding himself, from the smart dress which signaled him out as a potential lieutenant. That was bad news on a quirk power front, if a brute like the shark guy would answer to him. Big wide eyes looked Izuku up and down, and the guy ran a bony hand through his manky hair. Now that would be a crime, wouldn't it? Izuku felt sweat on his forehead, sliding down his face. Isn't this Yakuza territory? Sharkhead snorted, and the final member of the trio, the skinny blonde, cackled as if possessed. Who the hell do you think we are, kid? Dumb question, the tattooed woman said, shaking her head in exasperation. Kids these days got no sense. Now Izuku gulped. Right, sorry. Don't school kids get a free pass? He chuckled, smiling nervously. The shark's grin became even more sadistic. Hey Setsuno, the boy thinks he can negotiate. Ain't that cute? The leader, now identified as Setsuno, sneered. We don't like people who want to weasel out of paying. That's double the money from you and your freaky friend, kid. Izuku's eyes darted about the area. No sign of the police, no sign of any heroes, he was alone here. I don't have any money. That's cool, said the tattooed one, we'll just take your stuff then. Betcha those text and notebooks will come in real handy for next year's students. Setsuno's hand reached out with those long fingers, and in an instant Izuku's backpack was ripped from his shoulder and was hanging by the strap in his hand. The brief wonder Izuku felt at the quirk, and the instant ability to steal what was in front of him, was replaced by the sheer upset that the Yakuza had his stuff in front of him. The backpack was old, and the pencils in it easily replaced, but Setsuno had his hero analysis notebooks, numbers 11 and 12. They were his pride and joy. Hey. My notebooks dash. The tattooed woman stepped in front of her leader and cracked her knuckles threateningly. You wanna go, you little runt? You can run now and leave that bag behind, or you can stay here and I'll beat you, till your mother doesn't recognize your face. What's it gonna be? As Izuku, tensed, his brain screaming at his body not to flee and to hold his ground to get his notebooks back, all of them heard someone clapping. Very slow, ominous clapping. All of them, Izuku included, turned and saw Tenko clapping very sarcastically, looking incredibly unimpressed with what he was seeing. So, this is the Yakuza way, huh? Hiding in alleys and trying to take lunch money off kids by outnumbering them? His look of displeasure remained, even as he started taking off his gloves. Bullies are pathetic. Ha ha ha. The shark's laugh was rich and deep with bass. So the creep does talk. He's bold. T10. Izuku's eyes widened as Tenko took off his other glove. We can't. Our quirks dash, they used their quirks and took your books, Zoo. Neither boy used their full name around the Yakuza thugs, they knew better than that, but Izuku was stunned as his friend stood and stared down the two hulking lackeys of the smartly dressed Setsuno. We're not letting that happen. But still dash, we're in an alley, facing a mini-boss, and the heroes and police aren't gonna get here in time. If you don't want to use your quirk, we lose your inventory and we get party wiped. If we take them on, then we get your stuff back and teach this goons a lesson. Tenko clenched a fist and nodded to Izuku. I've got your back. You wanna do this? We'd be like vigilantes dash, nah, vigilantes don't have a death wish. Setsuno stared at the two boys, and giggled. As if you think you have a chance. You're writing me off already. Tenko rotated a shoulder with a crack, as if limbering up for a punch. Your first mistake. The blood flowing in Izuku's veins went cold at the sound of the tattooed woman's barked laugh, as she pulled a metal crowbar from the back of her pants and pointed it at Tenko. Precious. What's a toothpick like you gonna do to us? Tenko just smiled darkly. Just watch me. The shark laughed even louder than his friend, as he too produced a crowbar from somewhere. What? Gonna kill me? If I did, they'd never find the body. Making as soft a motion as he could, Izuku tried to get Tenko to calm down. Can we all just take a step back and dash, no? Said the tattooed one, turning around to face the brunette, the tattoos on her arms now emitting piercing blue light. He thinks he's a man. She snorted, and Tenko smirked. Let's see if he's really all that. It was completely instinctual, but as she rushed forward with a scream and raised the crowbar over her head to hit Tenko, Izuku threw his arms forward and felt the crackle of red and black lightning spring up in an instant. In any other circumstance, the movement would have been too telegraphed and it would not have worked, but surprise was on his side. The Yakuza was met with a blast of solid air to the rib cage and dropped the crowbar as she was launched backwards, slamming into the dumpster on which she had been sat. There wasn't even a cry as her head smacked into the side of the metal box, and she slumped unconscious at the feet of Setsuno. Izuku was torn for a second as to how to respond, and the only reason he was able to make his next move without being overwhelmed by Setsuno was because the Yakuza ringleader seemed completely stunned that his comrade had been overwhelmed in an instant. As Sharkhead charged at Tenko past Izuku, he made up his mind and dived for the crowbar on the floor, snatching it up and brandishing it in front of him like a sword at Setsuno. Ha! Unfortunately, Izuku had forgotten his opponent's quirk in the heat of the moment, and with a wiggle of his fingers the crowbar flew from Izuku's grasp into the hands of Setsuno. You little shit, did you think you'd be able to use that against me? Give it back. Izuku shouted, arms sparking up. This is what you get for hurting Isamu. Setsuno's arm drew back with the crowbar like a javelin, and Izuku twisted to see his target. Tenko had batted the shark man away with a kick and the guy was clawing at his vest, the crowbar he had been holding disintegrating in his hands, but Tenko had left himself wide open. He was going to hurt Tenko. Stop him. Hurt him. Wrath. With a cry, both of Izuku's arms pulsed with red and black lightning, and a shockwave went off across the whole alleyway. While Tenko was used to shockwaves from Izuku's quirk practice and simply cartwheeled out of the way, Setsuno and Sharkhead were launched backwards, and the crowbar clattered out of Setsuno's hands onto the floor of the alley, landing between Izuku and the Yakuza. Setsuno snarled, as Izuku snatched up the crowbar again. You annoying bastards. He reached out. And the crowbar stayed put. What the? The Yakuza flayed out his hands again, but the metal rod stayed immovable in Izuku's hands. Eyes widening in complete horror, he flailed and tried to do the same to the backpack which Sharkhead had picked up, and then swiveled to flick his hand at the unconscious Isamu, but nothing came to him. No. Ugh. Sharkhead had pulled himself upright, before looking down and realized the vest he had been wearing had been completely destroyed by Tenko. Geez, what are you two? Tenko raised both hands and flexed his fingers like the writhing legs of a dying spider, and slowly reached for the mammoth of a man, as the mutant type went pale and backed off. We'll have our stuff now, please. Izuku, nose dripping blood and swaying slightly from the blast, grabbed his bag from the floor and moved back from Sharkhead. Thank you. Mine. My quirk. Sharkhead looked down at his leader, hunched on the floor. Setsuno, you okay dude? My. Setsuno's head whipped up to stare at Izuku with eyes bulging, and a look of pure anguish on his face. What did you do? The Yakuza tipped his head back and wailed, the broken cry of a man suffering a mental break, a man who had just been tipped over the edge. No! Sharkhead panicked, slinging an arm underneath his broken leader and lifting him over his shoulder as he still wailed. Fuck this. The shark spun on his heels and ran for the hills with Setsuno secured on his shoulder, leaving his unconscious comrade Isamu behind against the dumpster. Clearly there was no loyalty among thieves. Tenko chuckled darkly to himself as the big thug's footsteps were punctuated by the wails of his stricken boss, putting his gloves back on. Pathetic. When he looked at Izuku, his bravado shifted aside and was immediately replaced with wide eyes. He knelt by his side in a flash, inspecting the bleeding nose closely. You alright? Why yeah. Izuku forced a smile, shouldering his backpack. Just pushed myself too hard with that shockwave, that's all. Heh, you did good though. Tenko grabbed under his arm, pulling him up. Come on. Let's get you home. Thanks. Izuku took a handkerchief which Tenko offered him, to cover his bleeding nose. He paused, and looked his older friend up and down with concern. For a second. I thought you were gonna hurt those guys. The Bluenet shrugged. No one would have missed them if they'd been dusted. Then he ruffled Izuku's hair. But you were there, so, I couldn't do that. Tenko. Izuku wasn't in the mood for him joking about that. Nah, I would have stopped. I only touched the guy's shirt to scare him into backing off. Tenko looked at him seriously. Just wanted to do something to back you up, that's all. Izuku smiled, satisfied now. Thanks, Tenko. Thanks for standing up for me. Tenko grinned now, pounding his own fist with a chest, and Izuku was reminded of Mirko and All Might at their cockiest. What are friends for? It wasn't too much farther to retrace their steps back to safety, and then get to the Midoriya home in the old neighborhood, and Izuku shook his head at what had happened in such a short time. The roads were cracked with faded paint, trees swayed in the wind with broken branches and no leaves, hedges remained overgrown and wild with no care from their owners. The house had chipped paint and more battered cars out the front, and the doors and windows looked like they had bigger locks and catches. More than a few of them had "For Sale" signs out front. Frowning at the one sitting by his own mailbox, Izuku trudged up to the front door. He barely got inside and his mother, waiting to hug him and welcome him and Tenko home, deflated almost immediately. Aizu. She ran up to him, inspecting his face. What happened? Both boys sighed and droned out the same word. Idiots happened. Without another word, Inko pulled them both into a tight embrace. I'm glad you both made it back. Tenko squirmed out of her hug in embarrassment and grabbed Izuku's bag, slouching into a chair in the living room. Did we miss that press conference for Endeavor? About the changes to the hero system? No, he's on later now. Apparently he got caught up dealing with a bus hijacking in Hosu. Inko smiled brightly at the two boys. Enough time for you to clean up, Izu, and for us to eat before it. You wouldn't want to miss an announcement about heroes now, would you, my little fanboy? Izuku groaned at his mother's affectionate teasing, as Tenko snickered, digging through Izuku's backpack to find the new game he had bought before training. Mom. I'm sorry, Izu, I couldn't resist. She let go of the hug and squeezed his shoulder. Now go sort yourself out. We can eat once you're in better shape. Izuku took that as his cue to slink off to the bathroom to mop up his face, as his mother followed Tenko into the living room. Running cold water off into the sink to splash his face with, he noticed that a stray piece of debris or something must have struck his face following the shockwave. There was a little nick, about the size of a fingernail, on his left cheek, which looked like a little upwards penstroke on his face. Not exactly the most impressive battle wound, but it would definitely leave a scar. Need help, sweetie? Inko asked, shouting up the stairs already. Ever the worrier. Izuku shook his head. It's nothing I haven't dealt with already. He shook the water off of his hands where he had been rubbing his face, pulled the plug to release the water stained with murky red and brown streaks from the blood he had washed off his face, and reached out for a towel only to find they didn't have any. Mom? She had appeared at the door, holding the phone she was going to use to call for takeout in one hand and a fresh white towel in the other. Way ahead of you, Izu. Sorry I forgot to put one out earlier. Thanks Mom. He turned to walk towards her in the doorway and lifted his arm. Soft. Huh. Izuku looked down, and his eyes widened at the sight of his left hand, clutching the towel his mother had been holding. He hadn't been anywhere near enough to grab hold of it and take it from her, and yet here he was, feeling fresh cotton between his fingertips. What the? Izuku? His mother took a step back uncertainly. What did you just do? He ignored her question, as a heavy and horrible realization suddenly hit him, and he turned with his right arm lifted, outstretched towards the pot in which he and his mother left their toothbrushes overnight. Just like he had seen her do when she pulled it towards her, he flexed his fingers, and nothing budged. Surely not. It wasn't like her quirk. It hadn't manifested like her where he could pull things from around the house to him. This was different, and he suddenly got an idea why. He turned to his mother, right hand outstretched, and felt the sudden weight as his mother's mobile phone landed in his palm, ripped from her grasp across the room. She gasped. What, is this your quirk? No. No, it wasn't his quirk. With a horrible sinking feeling in his stomach, as he put the dots together, the image of a wailing blonde Yakuza thug filled his head, as he realized he had just taken those items from his mother's possession. He had used the Yakuza's quirk. No. Setsuno had screamed that he couldn't do it anymore. He hadn't been able to take the crowbar back off of Izuku after the shockwave. He had taken the Yakuza's quirk. Oh no. Oh, yes indeed. Izuku Midoriya and Tenko Shimura. Aged, 13 and 15. That's gonna be it for today folks. Remember, if you enjoyed this video to like, comment, share and subscribe and see y'all next time.